Please welcome to the stage Idaho Business for Education Chair, Andy Scoggins.
Good morning and welcome to the Idaho Business for Education 2021 Annual Legislative Academy. Through my vantage point as chair of the IBE and a member of the Idaho State Board of Education this year, I have been fortunate to see so many quality Idaho Business for Education member companies step forward and lead in a time of uncertainty and of tremendous need. Now, despite the many incredible pressures and challenges that have arisen with respect to our own businesses, we have not lost sight of the greater needs of our state and of its citizens. We have been part of the solution, and we've gathered thousands of laptop computers for children in need. We've raised significant money for and coordinated with internet providers to bring connectivity to rural students. And we've added new, energetic, and highly qualified executives to our CEO, Rod Grammer's staff to move forward our efforts to support apprenticeship efforts in our state and to strengthen our schoolhouse strategy. I am highly appreciative of all the companies who support this great work, and I personally welcome the new member companies who have joined us this year. I look forward to today's event and to the work we will do together in this new year. Thank you all for joining us today, and I wish you all a happy and successful and prosperous 2021.
Please welcome to the stage Idaho Business for Education President and CEO, Rod Grammer.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning, Idaho legislators, IBE members, and our education partners. We have a treat for you today. We have hopefully it'll come up, a big screen here where I can see you all. And yeah, there you are. Representative Clow, Representative Alana Rubel, Doug Oppenheimer, yeah, Jeff Fox. It's great to see you all. Thank you for being with us today. Well, today is our 9th annual IBE Legislative Academy, and as you can see, today's Academy is unlike any other we've ever had. Unfortunately, we cannot have breakfast together as we have in the past years, but we are so glad that you could be with us today, even if it's virtually. I hope you saved some of your questions for our guest speaker today. When we get to the Q&A section of the program, just put your questions in chat. I'll be looking for that. Or raise your hand, and I will make every effort to call on you. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you today to our keynote speaker, General Craig McKinley. Greetings, General. Hope you're doing well. The General is joining us today from beautiful, and I may add, warm Jacksonville, Florida. Before I turn the program over to the General, I'd like to give our audience a little information about his incredible career in the military and how he became so knowledgeable about social-emotional learning. General McKinley graduated with business administration, with a degree in business administration from the University of Southern Methodist University in Dallas, and received his master's degree in management and economics from Webster College in St. Louis. The General also completed studies at the National War College and earned a degree in national security management from the National Defense University. In 1974, General McKinley received his commission as a distinguished graduate of the ROTC program at Southern Methodist University. And after joining the Air Force, he served in numerous assignments at flying in operations, group, wing, sector, and field operating levels. His last assignment in the Air Force was the Chief of the National Guard Bureau, where he led and served as a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. In this capacity, he was a military advisor to the President, to the Secretary of Defense, and the National Security Council. General McKinley was also the Department of Defense's official channel of communication to the nation's governors and adjutant generals on matters pertaining to the National Guard. As an aside, in this latter role, he made several trips to Idaho, where I know he worked with Governor Butch Otter. For you aviation fans out there, General McKinley was a command pilot with more than 4,000 hours. He flew in the T-38, F-106, F-16, and F-15 fighter planes. In 2012, General McKinley retired as a 4-star general from the Air Force after 38 years. Significantly for today's presentation, General McKinley served on the Aspen Institute's Commission, which studied the importance of social-emotional learning for students. The Commission's work resulted in a comprehensive study called A Nation at Hope, which provided a blueprint for strengthening social-emotional learning for our students. He will be talking today about that Commission's work and recommendations surrounding social-emotional learning. Welcome to Idaho, General. It's great to have you. How's everything in Jacksonville this morning?
Thank you, Rod. It's great. And yes, it's going to be a high of 67 down here. I don't want to give anybody any urges to move south, but we look forward to a great day.
Well, good. It was a little bit icy this morning in Boise, and we still have snow, great snow in the mountains for skiing. So two different environments, but thank you for being with us. So General, I'm going to turn the program over to you. And remember, audience, that after the General's presentation, please put your questions in Zoom or in chat, and I'll be watching for those. And I'll also be looking for you to raise your hand if you have a question on your own screen. So General, thank you for being with us, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you again, Rod, and thanks for the coordination of you and your staff. It's been very much a pleasure working with you. My assistant, who really is my brains in the entire Aspen project, is Jennifer Brown Lerner. You'll see her face in the Hollywood squares. I want to thank Jennifer for helping too, because it's actually been 2 years, Rod, since we actually rolled out A Nation at Hope. So some things have changed, as we all know. So I'll give you the background of what started the commission, why it started, and then how we rolled out the findings. And then we should probably talk a little bit about what effects the pandemic has had on some of the recommendations. Just on a point of personal pride, thank you for the Idaho legislators who are with us today. I appreciate your time. I know you're very busy as we start this new year. Yes, I did work very closely with Idaho. The National Guard in Idaho is one of the most outstanding organizations that I had the pleasure of working with. I worked with former Adjutant General Larry LaFrenz, and I also worked with former Adjutant General Gary Saylor. And your current Adjutant General, Mike Garshak, is a great leader. I know the governor selected him for a reason, but he's doing a wonderful job for Idaho. And another point of personal pride, and when Jennifer asked me if I could do this, my father and mother met at the University of Idaho. My father grew up in Coeur d'Alene, born in Mullen. I'm an Idaho offspring. Unfortunately, my dad was moved to Denver back in the late 60s. He was a mining engineer, so that kind of was the center of power for the mining engineering field. But he worked in northern Idaho his whole life, grew up there, and I have a lot of relatives in the northern Idaho area. So thanks again, Rod, for the opportunity to be with you today. Jennifer's going to move the slides, so I'll go to the next slide, Jennifer. And I want to talk a little bit about the commission. This is one of our quotes that we thought was very important to us as we began our work. The Aspen Institute National Commission on Social, Emotional, and Academic Development was created to engage and energize communities in re-envisioning learning to encompass its social, emotional, and cognitive dimensions so that all children can succeed in school, in their careers, and in their lives. The Commission's work is drawn on research and promising practices to recommend how to make all of these dimensions of learning part of the fabric of every school and community. The Commission's members are leaders from education, research, policy, business, and the military. The full Commission team includes a Council of Distinguished Scientists, a Council of Distinguished Educators, a Youth Commission, a Parent Advisory Panel, and a Partners Collaborative. The funders, obviously, of the Commission's work were very important to us, and I would like to thank all of those who contributed monetarily to our work. The report, which culminated, as I said, almost 2 years ago, was a report from the nation, and it was to the nation. It drew on the input we received over the past 2 years from conversations, meetings, and site visits across the country, as well as from the members of all these groups. It reflects the more detailed recommendations for practitioners, policymakers, and researchers contained in the reports that back it up. So next slide. That's a good picture of why I believe the commission was framed. That's a good reason for what our mission was. And Linda Darling Hammond was a co-chair along with Jorge Benitez. Jorge was a former CEO at Accenture. Linda Darling Hammond was a professor emeritus at Stanford in education. So we were very well led. In the beginning, Governor John Engler, former governor of Michigan, actually was one of our co-chairs. So we believed our mission. We believed that was what we were supposed to do. And in the succeeding 2.5 years, we did do all those things. We visited 3 major locations. We visited Cleveland, Ohio. We visited Seattle, Tacoma, and we visited Austin, Texas. And we listened to teachers. We listened to family members. We listened to legislators. And most importantly, we listened to parents, because this isn't a new science. This isn't rocket science. This is common sense. But somehow throughout the years of budget cuts to education and some of the policies that some of the people at the national level put on, social emotional academic development did not receive the importance that we think it should have. Next slide. This is how we work. This is how we did our work. We really didn't go in with any preconceived ideas, even though one of our emeritus leaders, Dr. Jim Comer, who worked and does work at Yale in the Child Study Center, had done previous work in this area. He was always cautious to us as we approached our work, in that he said in the 50s and the 60s, social emotional academic development was in vogue. People were starting to pursue it, but for whatever reason, antibodies formed around it, usually around resource presentations, to keep it from becoming a mainstream idea, something that the educators could be taught how to do, and that the parents could assist, as well as the other organizations that help young people do their job. Next slide. This is kind of our auditorium slide, and I know it's hard to read, and we'll be making these slides available to you all on a website, so don't think you have to copy these down, but it kind of shows you the ecosystem that the commissioners used to research the project, to study the project, to bring the various backgrounds that they had to the issue of social emotional academic development, and to get us and inform us as we move towards our recommendations. Next slide. I think it's important to look at the groups that we thought were most important, to seek their ideas, to try to find consensus, and to help us inform our recommendations. Obviously, for most of us, the family is where social and emotional training occurs. It occurs very early in a child's life. It has changed since I grew up in the 50s, where I had a stay-at-home mother, to now where we have dual income families, less time spent at the kitchen table for sure. I can attest to that with 2 granddaughters and a grandson and daughter in Dallas. So families were really important to talk to learn from, and to garner their feelings. We also felt that it would be important to talk to young people, young men and women, various backgrounds, various economic strains of our lives. And we found that the small group that we put together to inform the commission were very vocal, very helpful, and gave us a great sense of where we needed to go. Next slide. These were the calls to action from those 2 groups, and how we learn from the children, and in support of how children learn from the families. And we found that in all the communities, from Ohio to Washington State to Texas, I'm sure in Idaho as well, These two constituencies are extremely important to bring the outcome of some of the recommendations that we brought out to life. Next slide. This was a pretty interesting statistic. Most of the principals in the schools that we visited and through our surveys, believing that social and emotional skills will improve student academic performance and behavior. We were a little worried at the beginning of the commission work that teachers would say, you know, we just don't have enough time. We can't teach math, English, science. We can't do all the things involving watching the children, the discipline of children, teaching to not only the highest academic achievers in the class, but the lowest. We felt that teachers might be resistant, not because it's not good common sense or science, but because they didn't have the time to focus on these skill sets. But what we found was just the opposite, that 9 out of 10 teachers believe that social and emotional skills can be taught and benefit the students. And the commission always went back to the fact that it should start in the home. It does not replace the skills that mothers and fathers, blended parents can give to those kids. But nevertheless, because so much of a child's time from pre-K to 12 is spent in a classroom, we felt it was important that they get it there too. And then finally, for those of you who are in business in Idaho, 8 in 10 employers say social and emotional skills are the most important to success, and yet are also the hardest skills to find. That was a very interesting dilemma that we found. Next slide. For those of you in the business community, when we had a chance to be with you, the commission found these traits to be very important. I think all of us on this Zoom call today can agree that those skill sets are what we want to develop in young people. We want them to be able to go out into the workforce, whether they go to college or not, and have these kind of skill sets in their toolkit so that they can help wherever they end up. In my particular case, the military, to contribute, to be successful, and to be leaders. Next slide. The key takeaways from the business community are these. Again, not stovepiped academic training, but a broad range of social and emotional schools, and many that we had not previously named. Certainly, in the HR departments in many of your organizations, they look for social and emotional skills. From the minute a young person walks in the room and shakes a person's hand, to looking at a person in the eye to communicate, to speaking clearly, to having self-confidence. Those are things that are very important. And it's ironic that some young people have not learned that by the time they graduate from high school. I think most corporate leaders, and Idaho has some outstanding corporate leaders, you think globally about the assessment and development of social and emotional skills, and in a very globalized world, it's important that we can't teach that later in life. We can catch up, but you put a person at a great disadvantage if they don't develop those skills when they're younger. And we did find that business leaders have plenty of ideas about what schools can do better, and the National Commission can do more to bring them into the effort towards school improvement. It's ironic that in many communities, business leaders are mentors to these young men and women, and we find that those mentors are very positive in a child's outlook on life. And it's not just grades and academics that impress these young men and women, but it's the role models that the business leaders gave them that really made a difference. Next slide. This is not an easy concept to put forward. And as you can see by this slide, it's a challenge of aligning all of these things to come up with an outcome that produces a better citizen, a better young person, a person ready to take on the challenges of life. So we looked at how we could bring all of these things together so that it wasn't an overwhelming list of challenges. And I think in the 2.5 years that we stayed together as a commission, I think we did a very fair job of doing that. Next slide. Obviously, science today is a very important part of our day-to-day lives, obviously in the medical world, but also the sociologists have said these two things. The power of the social brain has been totally underestimated. It's the driving force in cognition. It's the gateway to learning. A very esteemed academic in the University of Washington gave us that. And then finally, from the University of Southern California, the process of building knowledge is an inherently emotionally connected, deeply subjective experience. Again, these things informed us as we worked our way to a solution. Next slide. This is a very complicated slide. I don't expect you to read it. It's kind of an eye chart, but it's the evidence base for how learning happens. And it really does summarize how social emotional academic development will result in a more outstanding citizen and an outstanding student. Next slide. This is how the practice base for how learning happens. Again, very scientific. We felt we had to delve into the science of academic development and learning that social and emotional skills are very important. The settings, obviously not all schools are created equal. Where those schools are located in our communities is important. The support of the family, the support of those organizations that support those schools, very, very important to a student's progress. Next slide. And these are the three documents that I referred to at the beginning, which did inform the commission and that did come out periodically in the commission's work. I would call your attention again to our website. These documents are all available to you, to your school administrators, to your principals. And at the end, I'll give you that website so that if you're interested in getting more granularity, more fidelity on what we did at the commission and how we informed our progress, you can take a look at those documents. Next slide. So here are the recommendations that the committee came up with. We wanted to set the vision, generally speaking, of what a student's success belongs. What is the whole child? We wanted to suggest that you can transform learning settings if they're not already there, because many cases they're already existing. So they're physically and emotionally safe and foster strong bonds among students and adults. We were struck by some schools in some very poverty-ridden parts of big cities where students were actually scared to go to school. They were scared to get on a bus. They were scared to walk to a bus stop. And we all know what that does to a young person and their ability to progress. Next. We believe you can change instruction to teach students social, emotional, and cognitive skills. We believe you can embed these skills in academics and school-wide practices. And once again, I believe many of these things are already existing in our schools, but we felt we had to give an emphasis to them so that we could support the school principals and those academicians who believe these are very essential to building a total human being. And then we wanted adults, especially parents, to develop an expertise in child and adolescent development. It's a tough world out there. And again, in dual income families, it is hard for mothers and fathers to do those things which develop the adolescent completely. Next slide. Obviously, resources, as you all know in your business, are very important, especially those of you in the state legislature. You have to align what scant resources you have, leverage partnerships across the schools, families, communities, and it addresses the whole child. And then we wanted to believe that you could shift the research paradigm by forging closer connections between research and practice. I guess as a former fighter pilot and a 38-year member of the Air Force, I forgot that there is a great deal of science out there, but we need to make science simple so that those academicians who practice this day in and day out, and families and students, can understand it. Next slide, please. And this is the movement dedicated to our children. We want our academicians to know we support them. We want them to believe that reshaping learning and changing lives is doable. And we reached a consensus that what appeared at the beginning of our commission as a nation at risk is finally a nation at hope. If you'll go to the next slide, please. And if the control room could play the video, this is a 2-minute and 15-second video, and then we'll get back to you, Rod, as a moderator for some questions and hopefully some good answers.
There was a belief that you could just go direct to the academics. That we now know that's not true.
We're learning a lot about the science of learning, and we're understanding that learning is social and emotional, and learning is also interactive. We can make learning happen because we know so much more about how it happens.
The science is overwhelming. Social and emotional learning is a booster rocket to all the things we already measure in our educational system. Achievement, graduation rate, post-secondary enrollment, attainment, attachment to the workplace, civic engagement.
We do big longitudinal studies which have shown children's functioning is tied to a set of key life outcomes 20 to 30 years later. They're not just academic outcomes, they're life outcomes.
As I started to spend more time with other business leaders, what I learned is that it wasn't just Accenture and it wasn't just consulting or technology companies. We have hundreds of thousands of very high-paying job opportunities, but nobody to fill them. If we can figure out a way to get the right skills and capabilities of students so that we don't have to create those skills in them, then our businesses will be more successful. So it's that simple.
From my experience in the United States military, it's something that we as leaders should encourage all of our communities to look at to see if it would be applicable for their young people.
It has to be done. The price for not doing it is too high.
I want school to be the place that's the most exciting place in America to be for kids and for adults alike. I want school to be the place of dreams, of excitement, of inspiration, of pursuit, of curiosity, of challenge, of community, of team building. We've got the moment. We now have to capitalize upon it.
You in my last minute, which I promised Rod I'd keep it to 30 minutes, that you would get a website, which I hope you can call up. There's a great book out, which I'll show here, Nation at Hope, and I think there's some of those available also. So to Jennifer, who helped prepare this presentation, this slideshow, to you, Rod, for the invitation, to all of you for your time this morning. I appreciate that very much. And that concludes my formal remarks, Rod.
General, thank you. Thank you very much. What a great presentation. And, you know, I learned something besides social emotional learning. I did not know about your ties to Idaho. So that's really great. So you're an honorary citizen of the state of Idaho. So thank you for that great presentation. We're already starting to get some questions in chat, so I'm going to be going to those in a few minutes. But I'd like to just remind everybody who's in the audience today to, if you can, turn on your camera so that we can see you, and especially if you want to ask a question by raising your hand. So General, I'd like to start by, before we get to the report itself and our questions, is, you know, maybe to address the elephant in the room, and that is How do you think that COVID-19 virus has disrupted what's been going on in our schools? How has that affected our students, especially our most vulnerable students, in terms of social and emotional well-being?
Well, Rod, it is the elephant in the room, and I appreciate some comments that Jennifer made to me. She has 2 young students in the Washington, D.C. school districts. I have 2 granddaughters here in Florida. Obviously, each school is different for a vast majority of the nation's students. But whether you're in a hybrid model or whether you're in distance learning, we need to have educators continue to recognize the social and emotional aspects of learning. I would imagine relationships for young people today are incredibly difficult. I wrote down some notes thinking this question would come up. These are my thoughts. I would say that isolation is devastating this generation of students. Children went from attending schools with their peers and playing sports to staring at a screen all day alone in their rooms. In a country where childhood obesity is running rampant, our youth are stuck at home eating more and moving less, with drastically increased time spent on electronic devices. Isolation, stress, and reduced physical activity are taking a mental and physical toll on the country's youth. A staggering statistic, which I think many of you know, is less than 1%, 0.5% of today's youth qualify when they go to the military recruiters to join the military for a variety of reasons. Obesity is one, physical aptitude is another, but social and emotional and academic development is a large factor there. So I believe I was invited to sit on the commission because I feel, as my fellow members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff felt, that this is a national security issue in that so few of our young men and women are capable of serving, and our requirements are just as stringent probably as many of you in business and in industry. So those are my initial comments, and I'd actually, if Jennifer could be unmuted for a second. Jennifer, you feel this way in the District of Columbia. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I mean, one of the things that we've been talking about is that the real challenge for my 2 boys, who currently are both in distance learning, is that the social aspect of school is gone. And I have a 6th grader and a 7th grader. And I have a 6th grader that has started middle school without the ability to go into the middle school building. And so he's being asked to do things that he wasn't asked to do in elementary school, around having his own independent schedule, around changing classes, and all of those things are happening in a virtual environment. And the responsibility falls to my husband and I to help him both navigate some of these challenges simply of organizing his day differently than he did in elementary school. But he's really missing the opportunity to share this experience with his peers. And more importantly, to develop relationships with a whole new set of teachers that he hadn't ever interacted with before. We are very hopeful that come February, school buildings will be opening again, and that young people will have the opportunity to grow the relationships that I think have been somewhat stunted by the virtual environment that we've been in.
Thank you, Jennifer. Rod?
Yeah, General, what advice do you have for teachers, parents, and other adults to help our students through this really difficult time? We just started another winter semester. Students are back in school or learning at home. What do you think teachers and parents and others should be doing this winter to help our students?
Those questions, I guess, would vary from region to region, school to school. I know many of the schools in the Florida area are trying to at least make sure that young people get their one lunch a day that they were getting, either brown bag or they can go by and pick it up, because a lot of our children are not getting the nutrition they need in this environment. Teachers need to understand, and I think they do, that this is a very tough time for this generation of students, whether they be in pre-K or all the way into 12th grade. And that we're probably going to have to do some triage on the other side of this pandemic, whenever that may occur, maybe later in the summer, maybe in the fall, where we do go back and try to bring back the basics that these students haven't had by being in a classroom day in and day out. I know from my grandchildren here, they have very little connectivity to their teachers through a computer screen, and that emotional hugging that young children get in pre-K probably through 6th grade is just not happening in many cases. So I know teachers are aware of this. I know the school principals are aware of this. They're doing the best they can. So it would be probably not appropriate for me to give advice. But at the other side of this, we in leadership, in government, in business are going to have to stress that we don't want to create a lost generation that will affect us in this global world we're living in. That would be my answer.
Thanks, General. I'm going to go to some questions because we're getting a lot of questions from the audience, and I think it's important to go right to them. So I'm going to maybe go between some of my questions and some of theirs. But one of our members of the audience said, how do we ease the fear of parents who believe that social emotional learning may interfere with their right to teach what they consider their moral, religious, and social values? How can we do both, respect what the parents believe and make sure that we incorporate these things in the curriculum as well?
That is a tremendous question. The commission studied this very carefully. We encountered in one of our on-site visits some parents who literally were saying that we are taking away the responsibility at home for their upbringing of their children. I don't think we suggest at all in the commission's work that the parents are the most important aspects to developing social and emotional school capabilities. That parents retain the right through the school to learn and to approach social emotional learning at their own level and pace. This is not proscriptive. We are not telling parents how to do this. We are suggesting that there are tools and learning aids and things that they can get at their home, that they can be more aware of what's going on at their children's schools. And we all know that the parents who are the most involved with their children at schools, actually with their teachers, have greater degree of success. So there's no one single answer to that question. There's no magic pill. I think we respect the parents' rights completely, and they are the right of first refusal in terms of accepting some of this scientific data. And it's up to the schools, the teachers, business people, legislators to make sure that parents who are resisting at least get the fundamental background and training and education that we all got by being part of this commission to make up their own minds.
So, General, I want to ask you a question that's kind of closely related to that last question from the audience. That is, Idaho is one of 4 or 5 states that has no state support for early education. And I think one of the reasons that there's some resistance to that, especially in the legislature, is that legislators believe that this is the parents' responsibility to get kids ready for kindergarten. At the same time, we have 6 out of 10 of our kids coming into kindergarten not ready to learn how to read, and many are concerned that they're not ready socially, emotionally either. So how can we, if you were talking to legislators today especially, how would you address that question about getting kids ready for kindergarten at the same time easing that concern that somehow this is abdicating the parents' responsibility?
Again, very difficult question, and we had no hard and fast, you must do this. I will tell you just from my own personal experience, my granddaughter is in public schools here in Jacksonville, and she had a pre-K academic year last year that was disrupted by at-home learning starting the 1st of March. So she lost March, April, and May. That's 90 days of whatever she was involved in. And she and her fellow classmates are having a difficult time in first grade adapting to the level and pace of education. As a product of the 60s and 70s, I don't remember doing simple math until 2nd, 3rd, or maybe 4th grade. They're doing math in first grade now, first session of first grade, and reading. And I'm finding that we're having, as grandparents, and we love doing this, obviously, and the parents, trying to catch these young people up for those 4 to 6 months that they lost in pre-K, and trying to have them meet the standards that the first grade instructors, teachers have set for them in a very rigorous academic environment that really has kind of gone past people like me of my age. So I would suggest that for those worried about that, that maybe you go into the early grade teachers and ask for some of the work that they're doing. And if you can help them, help young students catch up some of the things they lost due to the pandemic, it will be value added to those students in the long run.
So a related question to, you actually touched on some of the pressures on the academic side. I think that we had a question from, it sounds like a teacher. There's so much emphasis on the academics and on assessments and things like that. How can teachers work if social emotional is so important to the outcomes for our students? How can teachers work that in when there's so much pressure to excel on the assessments?
Well, Jennifer gave me some great talking points, and I always give her credit because she's so smart at this entire subject. And as a full-time member of the Aspen Institute, brings great credibility to that organization. But she mentioned that we needed to increase the number of specialized support personnel at schools, and this includes counselors, psychologists, and other health and mental health professionals whose numbers have been dwindling in schools the past few years. That's one of the things the commissioners found at all 3 of our site visits, is that teachers are overwhelmed with teaching a curriculum for getting their students prepared for the aptitude tests that they must complete to progress to the next grades. And some of the schools we were in, actually, many of the teachers were becoming disciplinarians. They had to take some of the younger students who just weren't really ready for academic development and work a special group of kids so that they learn right and wrong and learn how to deal with a group setting. So I think if we have authorities in our states and the federal government who can see the value of adding these types of support personnel to the classroom in the schools, it will pay huge dividends and give teachers the chance to teach what they believe is most important for their students.
So General, it's relatively easy to measure how students are doing in reading and math and these things. But one question we got from an audience member is building social emotional skills such as resilience, which the questionnaire says is critical for everyone. But how do we measure things like resilience, and how do we measure some of these social emotional skills that students have? Are there ways to do that so we know we're making progress and the students making progress?
Yeah, these are awesome questions. I don't know where the metrics are on the measurement of social emotional skills. Aptitude tests, I don't think cover it. I think it's that teacher-student relationship where you see a young person enjoying the class, enjoying learning, enjoying participating. Those are not specific metrics to judge a student's progress and resilience. I will tell you, in the military, from my background in the Air Force, we found ourselves at basic training in Lackland Air Force Base in Texas, having to teach resilience and teach what we called grit and able to deal with tough situations, because in many cases, a student will go through the entire high school environment and maybe not even have anyone talk to them about resilience and meeting tough obstacles and overcoming them. So I don't think there is a certain test or an aptitude that shows. I think it's something that between parents, teachers, educators, principals, you can see, as we do in our basic training, those that have been taught it and feel comfortable in tough environments, and those who, quite frankly, shy away from it.
I just want to remind our audience that if you have a question, put it in chat. We're getting a lot of great questions from our audience, so please put it in there. General, when you got on this commission, I gather you got on it in part because you're concerned about national security and that we were not preparing young people to enter the military. But what surprises, once you got on the commission, what surprises did you find, that things that you didn't know before about social emotional that you learned?
Well, this is, I always have said this to my fellow commissioners, but my background as a military fighter pilot, the acronym, which we all live with in everything we do, SEAD to me was suppression of enemy air defenses. I didn't even know what social emotional academic development was, but I knew from my background flying fighters that people on the ground can reach up and hit you. So then I put that into practice, and I said, how do we translate this acronym into something people understand? And then I drew back on my experience, and Idaho has a wonderful school up in northern Idaho called the National Guard Youth Challenge Program, a place where Hugh Price, who was another commissioner, who was a mentor of mine, created the environment back in the early 90s, where kids who really, quite frankly, did not have the skill sets to succeed in high school, they failed, and the Idaho legislature needs to get a great deal of credit for this. We built academies in almost all our states where young men and women who have hit the wall, they can't go any further. They run into problems with the law. They're on drugs. They're not successful. And maybe their next step is committing a crime, drug use, overdose, suicide. This academy that you have in Idaho, I would suggest all of you take a peek at it, because it is a place where you can take anyone who's had a tough upbringing, a tough environment at home, a tough environment where you live, and you can teach over a 1-year in-residence program these young men and women the skills that, if they learned earlier in their careers, would have prevented them from reaching their breaking point. So I commend Idaho, your legislature, former Governor Otter, and the current governor, who was the lieutenant governor, for creating that academy in northern Idaho. I visited it, and it's a remarkable place.
General, we have a question from Representative Lance Clow, who's chair of our House Education Committee. And Chairman Clow he points out that there are many great programs like Leader in Me that incorporate some of these social emotional learning things. He's wondering if there are national resources for schools and money especially that could be used to implement some of these social emotional curriculum into Idaho schools.
I can see Representative on the picture, so thank you for that question, and appreciate all you do for our young people in Idaho. I'm going to turn to Jennifer here in a minute, who probably knows, in the 2 years subsequent to what the commission left was a final report, what maybe some of the national resources are. But I certainly would encourage those of you who are interested in this subject further to go to our website to get the background papers that we have and the videos that we have associated with it, so you can learn a little bit more about it. But Jennifer, what do you think about federal resources that can help states do their job in a better way?
And hopefully my sixth grader has decided that class is going to be in the same office as me right now. So hopefully you don't hear the background noise of the teacher talking as well. But I think there's two different things that we can point to. The first is what are the tools and resources that can help classroom educators do some of these things? And as General McKinley mentioned, the commission did an incredible job of pulling out instructional videos, other tools and resources, all which exist on the commission website that are specific practices that teachers can adopt in their schools and classrooms that help develop some of these skills. In terms of dollars that are available, this is where things get a little bit more tricky. Obviously, investment right now in a lot of ways has been redirected into pandemic relief and more specifically, safe reopening of schools. But there are federal grant programs that are focused not just on social emotional learning, but on some of the other things that General McKinley mentioned. Specifically, there's some incredible resources that the federal government has put together around utilizing climate and culture surveys in schools, which is a good baseline around the preparedness and the work right now of social emotional skill development in schools. In addition, there's a significant amount of professional development dollars that can be used through ESEA dollars that can be redirected to train or retrain teachers around social emotional skill development.
Thanks, Jennifer. I think that's going to be a huge challenge at the state and local level. Is how do we fund these types of programs? How do you hire more counselors? How do you hire school psychologists to help with these problems? And I don't have the answers, but I'll leave it to you all in Idaho because you can do it better locally maybe than the federal government can. But the federal government bears a great responsibility here also.
General, I'm going to stay on this topic just for a second. I'm going to kind of patch together a question I have, and there's a question from Chad about this. But as you indicated in your opening remarks, in the 50s and 60s, we paid a lot of attention to social emotional, and then it sort of drifted off the radar screen. And it's pretty clear from the study that parents, teachers, especially teachers, and especially the business community, believe that these skills are very, very important. So my question is, if this is so important, why is it so difficult to win support for it? In the last legislative session, the superintendent of schools asked for $1 million for this and actually got a lot of pushback even in the legislature, even though we finally got the appropriation for that. But there seems to be a lot of consensus outside of the legislative circle that this is super important. So why do you think it's so hard to get this back on our radar screen and to put the emphasis on it that we need to put on it?
Well, when I used to sit around the table with my fellow service joint chiefs, we always knew that there's limited resources and you have to prioritize. And right now, I guess, at least where I sit down in Florida, the priority is the pandemic, the vaccine rollout. Those things have pretty much sucked up all the oxygen in the air for things like this. I would say, based on the commission's work, that we need community partners, people in business, people in our churches, people involved at the local level, to remain cognizant of the requirement that we have to continue marching down the field with whatever types of social, emotional, and academic programs we can create in the schools. We have to engage each and every student right now and let them know that just because they're in a virtual setting or they're not having in-room classroom instruction, that there will come a time when we resume that, because we found that over the last couple centuries that's what produces great citizens. But I think we need to not put this on the back burner and let the heat drop on this subject. Before we started today, Rod, I asked Jennifer, what has Aspen been able to do subsequent to the rollout of the commission report? Aspen is a great organization, and they rely on grant dollars and individual donors to do their projects. So I think all of us are going to have to stay focused on this. I commend you, Rod, and Andy before you, who did the introduction, for putting this in front of your educators, business leaders today. I'll be honest with you, this is the first session I've done since the commission ended, which comes back and highlights the importance of the commission's work. So I commend Idaho and you for bringing it back to the attention of people who can actually get this done or get it started or light the fuse or whatever we want to call it, so that when we do resume normal teaching, this isn't forgotten. And I would think your community partners will be eager to support it, because in most cases, it's the communities that bind everybody together.
General, before the pandemic, we all knew that we had an achievement gap in our country between, especially between minority students and economically disadvantaged students and some of their peers. A lot of research has been done, even since the pandemic, saying that these students are actually falling farther behind because of the current situation. But did the commission have a sense that that social emotional skills, if we could teach those and incorporate them, could actually help improve academic achievement and help close that achievement gap between these students?
You know, I'll be quite frank. In my career in the military and then on the commission, one thing always surprised me and discouraged me. It was the failure of imagination. We saw it pretty much firsthand on September 11th, 2001. We didn't imagine that would happen. I don't think any of us on the commission, we didn't spend 1 minute talking about those things that could happen, which would change everything. Our outcomes, our objectives. We didn't talk about a global pandemic, even though I did, as a member of the Joint Chiefs, have a very lengthy session one spring, 90 days of looking at a future pandemic. I can't tell you how we make sure that this doesn't get lost in this space we're living in, because I do believe, and your audience probably can speak to this better than I, that we will seriously lose a generation of young people and other nations in the world who may be our allies, but certainly our competitors are aware of this, and many of them are pushing forward with social emotional training. We've just got to convince families first that these are uncommon times, that we will get through them, and that while we have the opportunities to be with our young people, to maybe use the resources that the commission has created to do some of that in-home training, that the schools, we just can't catch up by the time these students get back to in-classroom training. So very unsatisfying answer, but that's kind of where I think we are.
Thank you, General. I want to ask you a question that Park Price, IBE board member and Eastern Idaho chair of our group, is asking. And I think it gets to something you and I talked about before as we were talking about this presentation. That is, how important is social emotional learning outside of the classroom? Park raises the point that sports is a great place to teach kids, students, social emotional skills. There are other ways. There's debate, there's drama, there's things like that. But how important are these outside the classroom experiences for students in terms of learning these skills?
I think Jennifer and I would both agree, and the commissioners would agree, that this is essential. It takes everybody to participate in this process. We found ironically, that bus drivers who drove these kids to school have an important role to play in social emotional development. There is nobody in a young child's life that isn't teaching them wherever we assume they meet these people. Sports is an interesting question because we were able in the 60s and 70s and 80s to actually get our sports in school. And it was part of school, and our physical activity was part of school. But because of resource constraints and time constraints, that's really been outsourced. And so boys club, girls club, all the things that we used in the commission to get feedback on, are you able to assist our educational system in social emotional learning when you have those children for an hour or two after school or a dance class after dinner? Can you help us? And we found in most cases that these outside organizations were critical to the success and the partnerships that they had with their schools. So everybody's important. Every organization's important. I think sports are critical, especially from my vantage point in the military. Yes, we need young men and women who can deal with cyber crime and cyberspace, but we also need people who can carry a rifle and a ruck and go up a mountain and be lethal. And you're not getting that necessarily to the extent that we had, maybe some of the people in this call had when you were young people.
So General, sometimes, and teachers will raise this, well, they've got a lot of pressure on the academic side, but one of the things I've thought for a long time, I'd like to bounce this off you, is that it's not a matter of taking a class on social emotional skills. It's really embedding that element in everything we do, whether it's in school, whether it's in extracurricular activities like sports, or whether it's at the home. That if we all recognize how important these skills are, collaboration, teamwork, communication, that if we embed it in all of these activities, the classroom and out, that we can get this job done. Can you talk about that for a second? Because a lot of people might think, well, we just need to have a class called social emotional learning, but that's not what this is about, is it?
No, in many cases, it seems like it's common sense and that we do it naturally. I think the scientists would tell us that we need to have some fundamental understanding of what it is. But I guarantee you that if we were to take a poll of everybody that I see on this Zoom call, every one of us would have a teacher, a coach, a mother, a father, a grandparent who inspired us and taught us the very skill sets that the commission found were critical to the success of the individual person. We were the fortunate ones. You wouldn't be in state legislature, you wouldn't be a business leader, you wouldn't be a teacher or a school principal if someone hadn't given you their time, their effort, their sincere and unconstrained love in teaching you about how social emotional skills will benefit you in your life. I bet every one of us could talk about that for the next hour. But you're right. It isn't a book that you learn, but you can be informed by the books. You can be informed by the documentation that I think the commission did a very good job of producing. You can encourage principals, school administrators, teachers to talk about social emotional learning. And we can draw back on our own backgrounds, all of us, and say what made a difference in our lives, because that's really what we're trying to achieve here.
General, one last question, then we'll let you go so that you can enjoy that sunshine down in Jacksonville. If you were the commander-in-chief for the day here in Idaho, what are the next steps you think we should be taking to emphasize social emotional and really move the ball down the field on this for our students here in Idaho?
Well, I think based on the fact, as I said in my opening, that I worked with your military leadership who were responsible to the commander-in-chief called the governor. You have great leadership at the state level. And I'm sure that that's underpinned by all of you who support his efforts and that of the lieutenant governor. I was most impressed with Governor Otter. with his knowledge, his sincerity, his practical background. I had a chance to deal with all 50 states, the 3 territories, and the District of Columbia. And I can say that whenever I was invited to Idaho, I knew I was going to a state that was fundamentally ingrained in teaching young people how to survive and how to live, how to be successful, who were proud of their schools. My father was proud of the University of Idaho, my mother. You have a great fundamental understanding and underpinning of what this is all about. So I would just leave you with, you've got it all there right in front of you. And I just encourage you to hopefully maybe keep your focus on this subject. Citizens of Idaho deserve it. The students deserve it. Our nation deserves it. And you're well on your way to being a model state, in my opinion.
Well, General, thank you. Thank you for being with us today. And those of you who've joined us on Zoom, and thank you for being with us today. And thanks for your great questions, really great questions. General, this is a big day in Idaho because our legislature starts today. And so there are so many great issues facing the legislature, how to get through the pandemic, but how to keep educating our kids is the top priority for many of us here in Idaho. So thank you for your words of wisdom. Thank you for sharing your findings with us. And thank you for taking time out of your day to be with us. So thanks to one and all, and have a great day. Bye, General.
Manifest destiny. Back in the days we wanted everything, wanted everything. Mama said, burn your biographies, rewrite your history, light up your wildest dreams, museum victories. Every day we wanted everything, wanted everything. Mama said, don't give up, it's a little complicated, all tied up